September 15th, 1940, 11:47 in the morning, 22,000 feet above the Kent countryside, Pilot Officer Colin Gray had a Messerschmitt Bf 109 dead in his sights. 400 yards, closing fast. The German pilot hadn't seen him yet. Gray's thumb hovered over the firing button. 3 seconds to kill range. The Messerschmitt's nose dropped into a steep dive. Gray followed, pushed his stick forward, felt the negative G lift him against his harness straps. His Rolls-Royce Merlin engine coughed once and died. The propeller windmilled uselessly in the slipstream. The gun sight drifted off target. 1,030 horsepower, gone in an instant. Gray cursed. He knew exactly what had happened. Every RAF pilot knew. The carburetor had flooded. The engine had starved for 2 seconds, maybe 3. His Spitfire was a glider below him. The Messerschmitt pulled out of its dive and vanished into the clouds. The German pilot didn't even look back. He didn't need to. He knew the British couldn't follow. Gray's engine restarted with a rough cough. His 5th kill had escaped, not because of German skill, but because of British engineering. He landed at Biggin Hill 20 minutes later, filled out the same maintenance report he'd filed twice before. Engine cutout during negative G maneuver. Duration 2.3 seconds. Enemy aircraft escaped. The report would join 2,300 others in a filing cabinet at the Air Ministry. 2,300 documented engine failures during the Battle of Britain alone. 2,300 moments when British pilots were helpless in the sky. Somewhere in that stack of reports was the answer to why so many young men weren't coming home. But finding the answer wasn't the problem. The problem was that nobody could fix it. Nobody except a woman working alone in a laboratory at Farnborough. A woman most of the RAF had never heard of. Her name was Beatrice Schilling, and she was about to break every rule in the Air Ministry to save their lives. The flaw was simple. The consequences were brutal. The Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, the heart of every Spitfire and Hurricane, used an SU carburetor with a float chamber. During normal flight, gravity pulled fuel down into the engine. The system worked perfectly, but combat wasn't normal flight. When a pilot pushed into a dive, negative G forces threw everything upward, including the fuel. The fuel surged to the top of the float chamber. The float dropped to the bottom. The valve opened wide. Fuel flooded the system and drowned the supercharger. The engine died 1 second, sometimes 2, sometimes long enough for a Messerschmitt to circle back and put cannon shells through your cockpit. The Germans had no such problem. Their Daimler-Benz DB601 engine used direct fuel injection, no float chamber, no flooding. A Bf 109 pilot could roll inverted, dive vertical, pull negative G for 10 seconds straight. His engine never missed a heartbeat. Luftwaffe tacticians had figured this out within weeks of the first engagements. Their solution was elegant. When a British fighter gets on your tail, dive. The Spitfire will follow. Its engine will cut out. You escape, or you turn and kill him while he's helpless. They called it the English disease. They exploited it in every single dogfight. Fighter Command knew about the problem. They'd known since 1937. Engineers at the Royal Aircraft Establishment had written reports, filed recommendations, proposed modifications. Nothing happened. The Air Ministry had other priorities, production schedules, budget debates, arguments about whether the problem was really as serious as the engineers claimed. Then came the Battle of Britain. Between July and October 1940, RAF pilots documented engine cutouts in 43% of diving attacks. 43%. Nearly half of every aggressive maneuver ended with a dead engine. Squadron commanders estimated 80 to 100 pilot deaths were directly caused by the carburetor flaw. Men who had Germans in their sights, men who did everything right, men who died because their engines betrayed them at the worst possible moment. Rolls-Royce was working on a solution, a pressure carburetor, complete redesign of the fuel system using injection principles similar to German engines. Estimated completion, late 1943. The RAF couldn't wait 3 years. They were losing pilots faster than they could train replacements. Every week, experienced men were dying because of a float chamber designed for peacetime flying. The file landed on Beatrice Schilling's desk in November 1940. Principal Technical Officer, Carburetor Research and Development, the only female engineer at the Royal Aircraft Establishment. She read the combat reports. She studied the maintenance logs. She interviewed pilots who'd survived engine failures. She understood the problem within a week. Solving it would take her 4 months.
Testing it would risk her entire career. If you want to see how one woman's simple invention saved thousands of RAF pilots, hit that like button. It helps us share more forgotten stories from the war. Subscribe if you haven't already. Back to Schilling. Schilling wasn't supposed to be an engineer. She was born in 1909 in Waterville, a small town in Hampshire. Her father was a butcher. Girls from families like hers became secretaries or nurses or shopkeepers. Schilling had other plans. At 14, she bought a broken motorcycle with money saved from odd jobs. Her parents thought she wanted to ride it. She wanted to understand it. She stripped the engine down to its smallest components, learned what each part did, rebuilt it on her bedroom floor better than it was before. At 25, she raced that motorcycle at Brooklands, 106 miles an hour around the concrete banking. She earned the British Motorcycle Racing Club Gold Star, one of only 3 women in history to receive it. Racing taught her something textbooks couldn't: how engines behaved under stress, when they failed, why they failed, how to feel a problem before the gauges showed it. Now she was the RAF's carburetor specialist, and their carburetors were killing pilots. The solution came to her in January 1941. Simple physics. If the problem was too much fuel during negative G, restrict the fuel flow. Not completely, just enough to prevent flooding. The engine would still get what it needed, just not enough to drown. A brass disc with a hole in the center. Install it in the fuel line before the carburetor. Size the hole to allow exactly enough fuel for maximum power and nothing more. She machined the first prototype herself, tested 17 different hole sizes, ran simulations for 6 weeks. The optimal diameter, 0.04 inches. Bench tests were perfect. Engine cutouts dropped from 2 seconds to a fraction of a heartbeat, too brief to matter in combat. But bench tests weren't combat. Schilling needed to test it in an actual dogfight. The problem was authorization. Installing unauthorized modifications on RAF aircraft was a court-martial offense. The Air Ministry required 6 months of testing, review committees, safety certifications, paperwork that would take longer to complete than pilots had left to live. Schilling had 6 brass restrictors and a decision to make. She could wait for authorization, follow procedure, do everything by the book, or she could save lives now and face the consequences later. On March 17, 1941, Schilling loaded her Norton motorcycle with tools and restrictors, rode 40 miles through the English countryside to RAF Biggin Hill. The morning patrols were being prepared. Ground crews swarmed over Spitfires and Hurricanes, checking engines, loading ammunition. Schilling found the chief mechanic, a sergeant named Harris, who'd been maintaining Merlin engines since before the war. 16 years of experience, hands that knew every bolt and wire in the Merlin by touch. She showed him the brass restrictor, explained the physics, told him she needed to install it in an aircraft without authorization, without paperwork, without anyone in command knowing. Harris turned the restrictor over in his oil-stained fingers. Such a small thing, such a simple thing. How do you know it works? He asked. Bench tests, 6 weeks of them, perfect results every time. Bench tests aren't combat. I know, that's why I'm here. Harris looked at the Spitfires on the flight line, young pilots climbing into cockpits, young men who trusted their engines to keep them alive. I've lost 11 pilots to engine cutouts, he said quietly. 11 good men. Peterson, Williams, that Scottish lad, McLeod, couldn't have been more than 20 years old. He looked at Schilling, looked at the restrictor in his hand. If this thing works, I don't care if the king himself hasn't authorized it. He picked up his welding kit and walked toward the nearest Spitfire. Flight Lieutenant Al Dare was one of the most experienced pilots in Fighter Command. New Zealander, 54 combat missions, 7 confirmed kills. He'd been shot down twice, survived a mid-air collision, walked away from a crash landing that should have killed him. He'd also reported engine failure 4 times, all during diving attacks, all in the last 3 months. On March 17th, his Spitfire was the first aircraft fitted with Schilling's restrictor. He didn't know it. Nobody told him. If the restrictor failed, Schilling wanted the blame to fall on her, not on a pilot who'd had no choice in the matter. Harris welded the restrictor into the fuel line in less than 2 minutes, invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. Dare climbed into the cockpit at 07:15. Standard morning patrol, 2 hours over the channel, watching for German formations. Schilling stood at the edge of the airfield. Her heart was pounding.